Hey you, if you've got a second, please go to darknessprevails.org/review and review my podcast on iTunes. I'm desperately trying to get to 1,000 reviews, and now we're only 2 away from 800. Each one would help so much. Thank you. Today we have slime creatures, best boy werewolf attacks, and plenty of demonic activity to keep your thirst for thrills and spoops quenched. So grab your crusty old towel and prepare for a moist, scary night with these allegedly true horror stories. Remember, if you have a story of your own that you'd like to have narrated on the show, the first thing you gotta do is share it with us at darknessprevails.org. Thank you. Now, let's get to it. Past Shadows from ANON. It started a month ago. It was on a Wednesday after school during my high school art club. For this particular club, our instructor decided to take us down the road for a visit at our local cemetery. They took us there to sketch cool gravestone designs. I'd been there many times before, but not to this section, as none of my relatives were buried here. The town had a giant graveyard, and the town itself is minuscule in comparison to nearly every other town located in North America. At the time, freshly fallen snow covered every bit of the sidewalk, along with layers of ice from the mixture of snow and rain we had a few days ago. I remember, it was quite cold that day, and my fellow members of the art club and I huddled together to stay warm, clutching and shaking with our sketch pads and pencils, our feet sinking through the sticky, thick snow. We walked around for about 5 minutes until we finally reached the old cemetery. It dates back to the 1700s. It looked quite beautiful. The snow covered the barren branches of trees and cloaked the top of the gravestones. The instructor told us to go explore and have fun sketching out the various designs. The thing about this gravesite was that forests surrounded it. Like many buildings and areas in this small town, surrounding it was just wilderness. The large mass of woods consumes a section of graves too. Some of those graves are lodged in between trees and can be barely noticeable to the eye. Being my adventurous self as always, I grabbed my friend's freezing hand and walked around into the forest area of the cemetery. We walked for a little while and approached an old burial vault. I didn't pay attention to the name printed in bold letters at the apex of the chamber. Rather, I just paid attention to the environment, not wanting to trip over some up-sticking root or slip on a patch of ice. There was really an odd vibe to the place. It was different from the other parts of the cemetery. I was cold, but this place seemed to make the hairs on the back of my neck and arms stand up, like a different kind of chill. This usually doesn't happen to me, but I was quite freaked out by the feeling around this old burial vault. I turned over to my friend, about to tell her that we should leave. I could tell by her facial expression that I wasn't the only one who thought this. To sum up the creepiness, it felt like someone, just one other person there, was staring at us, even though we couldn't see them. I know it's cliché, but it really felt like we were being watched. It was coming from what seemed to be the inside of the vault. Exchanging glances again, I took my friend's hand and I started to walk back. Even though we were leaving, that feeling only worsened, causing our walk to quickly turn into a run. Now the thing about running in snow mixed with ice was it was easy to slip. That's exactly what happened to my friend. She slipped and fell, causing me to fly backwards onto my back. I looked around. First I saw that we were near the group instructor, and then behind us I saw nothing. The feeling of something being there was completely gone now. We laughed in triumph as we helped each other up, and a little while later it was time to go. My mother picked me up since I didn't have my driver's license yet, and we drove home through the now lightly falling snow. That evening, I was getting ready for bed at around 11 that night. It was Saturday the next day, so I stayed up a little longer. I've always had this irrational fear of looking into mirrors at night. I have no idea why. Maybe I'm just afraid of what I might see. That night, however, I felt exhausted. I had a bunch of assessments that week, and I just wanted to rest. Right after I finished brushing my teeth, that weird vibe my friend and I had felt from the cemetery earlier that day returned. I stared at the flowing water of the sink and was reluctant to look up. Curiosity and caution consumed me as the hair on the back of my neck stood on edge again. Something was drawing me to look into the mirror, but I felt too scared to do it all at once. Slowly, I averted my gaze from the flowing source of water toward the mirror. When I looked into the glass, I was relieved to see nothing there. Well, that's what I thought at first, at least. There was something else there, not in the mirror in particular, but a certain burning smell, kind of like sulfur and rotten eggs. It was foul, but faint. Squinting, I looked closer into the mirror. I noticed my shadow, but that wasn't my shadow. Mine was reflecting onto a different surface than the one I was looking at. So whose shadow was this? This shadow was tall, nearly reaching the ceiling, which admittedly isn't that tall as we lived in a trailer-sized home, but it still was unnatural for anyone who lived here. Not to mention the shadow had an eerie arch to its back. The shadow seemed to slowly walk off into the hallway, which was completely dark, as everyone else was in bed. I was absolutely terrified at the sight of this. I turned on the light of my phone and booked it down the hallway into my parents' room. I told them what had happened, waking my mother and father out of a very deep sleep. My dad believed what I said, but my mom, being a skeptic, was only irritated. Along with my dad, we called out a loud prayer, making darn sure that anything in that house heard it. The funny thing is, none of us are religious, so it was surprising that the feeling did go away just as quickly as it appeared after we were done praying. Fast forward to just the other night. I'm not sure if this relates to those events, but I got that feeling that I was being watched again. It was 2 a.m. this time, and I was awakened by a very loud sound. It was so startling, so frightening, that I woke up with my heart beating outside my chest. I turned on my light, only to see that the giant mirror that was literally screwed into the wall had been unscrewed and had somehow fallen onto the ground. Sluggishly, I left the warmness and security of my bed. Then I lifted up the mirror, which was face down on the ground, suspecting that somehow my cat, or gravity, had knocked it down, even though that should have been impossible. On the glass, instead of it being cracked or shattered, instead, there were scratches and claw marks that hadn't been there before. The ground below the mirror was clear, and there was no way anything was protruding to make those claw marks. I was on edge, but I didn't want to make a big deal of this. I didn't want to wake up my parents again. So I set the mirror between my desk and dresser so that it wouldn't be able to fall and wake me up again. As I did this, the hair on my arms were completely on end. I was rightfully freaked out. When I went back to my bed, I noticed my cat was sitting there. He was on top of his cat condo before I went to sleep, but now he was staring at an area near the mirror, wide-eyed and beginning to hiss. I turned the lights off, literally sprinting back to my bed. I pulled the sheets over my head, fearing that if I was too slow, I would witness something. That feeling was still there, but I managed to calm down a bit, relaxing to the point that my eyelids were getting heavy again. But just before I nodded off into sleep, I heard another startling loud sound, different from the first. I lifted up the sheets and peered out. The mirror was still there, but something was off. The lights were off, but I swear I could see something moving in the darkness of my room. I quickly got up and turned the lights on, and I was shocked at what I saw. I turned, and somehow in that brief second where I got up and turned on the light, the mirror now had a massive hole in it, a perfectly circular hole. I began to pray aloud. I closed my eyes and curled up on the floor, and eventually, the fear and terror went away. I'm starting to think that something at that cemetery attached itself to me. I'm afraid it will never truly go away. A terrifying discovery from GTINSIDER. A few years back, when I was 17, I had a friend that I loved hanging around with because of the simple fact that he was genuinely an interesting person. He loved the same games as me. We liked the same music. It was generally what I would call a good friendship. I never once imagined that something like this could happen. The longer we were friends, naturally, the more I learned about his family and his life. He had no heat during the winter, no AC during the summer. He also did not have access to his own room or shower. This family of his, of about 5 people living in a small trailer, of what I can assume was one that had been abandoned at some point, and repurposed into a makeshift living arrangement, were all basically confined to a living room and a very small bedroom. Not to mention that they only had one breaker for the entire house. I found out later they were only able to run a window AC unit that froze up so often that the house would regularly be 90 degrees or more. Besides that, they did have a TV and a PS4. My family was quite generous and caring for other people, and they actually allowed my friend to come live with us, as we did have an extra room. It would be a nice way for him to continue his life. He had his own job and he could support himself, so there shouldn't have been a problem, right? Needless to say, I thought everything was going very splendidly. We went to a Black Friday sale at Walmart together, got a new PS4 so he would feel more at home. He continued going to work as usual, and I even got him a phone that was way better than his $30 ZTE that he had been using. As time went on, issues began to arise with the living arrangement, mostly because his mother was still drawing food stamps off of him, and he ended up moving back to the house that I took him from, and eventually he got sent to foster care. Fast forward to just recently. I woke up this morning after having a dream that people were watching me from all around the house in different places. When I woke up, I had this intense curiosity to go check where those people had been hiding. Well, when I did, I was horrified to find phones hidden around the house, all of which had been connected to small chargers. They were recording our voices. They were everywhere, dozens of them throughout the house. Each of them was a ZTE Z812 phone. There was one behind the fridge, one in the lower part of my entertainment center, one under the bed in the spare bedroom, one under the sink in the middle bathroom, and one in the wall behind my TV in my room. All of them had been rooted and were running some kind of software that recorded things, sent it in packets to a source of some kind, then deleted the oldest data on a loop so that there was always room for a recording. I was terrified, realizing that many of my private conversations had been recorded, and God knows who was listening, and for what purpose. I lost contact with the guy a long time ago. I have yet to be able to find him again. And to this day, I'm still finding little devices around the house, and I'm scared to think that I'll never find them all, and I'll always be listening. I Saw It from the Tower, from LEAKUROOKAMI. I'm a certified corrections officer in the state of Florida, meaning that I actually went to a police academy and learned how to be a CO. There's a big difference between COs and guards. I actually guard the public from those who go against the norm of society. You see guards at crosswalks and such. Anyway, as a CO, I was assigned to a night shift called D shift. I worked 5 days, then 2 off, then 4 days and 3 off. My shifts always run 12 hours, so from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I was at the mercy of up to 300 inmates. This night in particular, I was in a tower with an AR-15 and a radio. Keep in mind that I work in one of the worst prisons in Florida. So as I was up there, we got a proximity alarm. No big deal, it was windy and the wind sometimes trips them. I went ahead and looked through the scope at the area as our outside patrol car rode around to it. I didn't see anything. Nothing there, so I reported it as such. I wrote it in my log and went back to sitting in the chair, waiting for my shift to be over. At around 1 a.m., the alarm was tripped again in the same place. The wind was still blowing pretty bad, so I thought no big deal. I again looked through my scope at the area, but this time, I froze. What in the hells is that? I thought to myself. Something was standing in the shadows. Now being a prison, it could be an inmate trying to escape, or a civilian trying to throw contraband over the fence. Yeah, it happens. I've even shot down a drone carrying contraband into the inside. Anyway, I spotted something and reported it to the center gate. They sent the patrol car over to take a look around. Whatever it was, it ran faster than the car was going. They just barely caught sight of it, although they could not tell what it was. My shift soon ended and I went home, pushing it from my mind until that next night. I was back in the same tower, same equipment as before. There wasn't as much wind that night, but when 1 a.m. rolled around, the alarm tripped again. This time, the crew wasn't happy. The prison went on alert, but not full lockdown. Not just yet. This time, the moon was brighter, and it helped light up the area. When I looked down the scope, I finally got a good look at it, and I was absolutely dumbfounded. I can say that what I saw looked kind of like a wolf, but it was standing up, like a person. The fur was as black as its shadow. My breath caught in my throat as I watched it. The center gate began calling me, yelling at me to report what I saw. But I was paralyzed. Even to this day, I couldn't just say what I saw to someone. It would cause me to lose my certification fast. But I know I'm not the only officer that saw it that night, because the roaming patrol car saw it too, and it scared the living hell out of both of us. We never did say what we saw to the higher-ups, for fear of our jobs and sanity. Sure, you might not believe this story, but in those prisons late at night, it's not always the inmates you should be afraid of, because things do go bump in the night. Demon in the Dark, from Brother Tony. I'm 33 years old and live in Austin, Texas. 12 years ago, I was a member of a Christian church in Killeen, Texas, due to my stepfather being stationed on Fort Hood. One night I was staying up late watching television. My family was sleeping, and my then girlfriend didn't come over, so I was bored and alone. Around 3 o'clock, I became sleepy and decided to call it a night. I went through my usual ritual of praying before I went to bed. Now, I'll give you a quick layout of my mother's house. When you first enter through the front door, you have to walk through a long foyer, and the first room you see is the living room, which will also lead to the kitchen. Once you're out of the foyer area, you can turn right and go down a hallway that leads to the bedrooms. The living room is decorated like most. Pictures, coffee table, couches across from the television. But my mother did have a big grandfather clock for decoration, which was broken. It was really just there to add flavor. As I decided to go to bed, I figured I could pray in the living room and then head to my room after that. I left the television going for light, but I had it muted. As I began to pray, I felt something off. Suddenly, the clock, the broken clock, began to tick. The ticking noise with each tick grew louder and louder until it was an echoing boom. My concentration was now broken. I stopped my prayer and got up, trying to look at the clock to see if the hands were moving, but I couldn't. The light just from the television wasn't bright enough to see. I walked into the kitchen and turned on the light, but to no avail. The kitchen light was not close enough. I could still hear the ticking noise growing louder in my head. The temperature in the house felt like it was dropping now, even though it was the middle of a Texas summer. Now I'd had enough. I began to grow frustrated and scared, so I walked across the living room to cut on the light. The light switch is right where the foyer ends. The hallway to the rest of the house begins. When I made it to the light switch, I had the urge to look down the hallway, and what I saw caused my entire being to freeze. There was a large, dark figure standing there, facing me. The only description I can give of it is what people claim shadow people look like. Now, I've watched plenty of horror films, and I've yelled for the protagonist to run when they freeze up like that and look at the monster instead of just running away. But I now know what that feels like. Everything in my body and mind was telling me to run, scream, to do something, but I was petrified. I finally snapped out of it, closed my eyes, and began to pray again. Then I cut on the light, and everything was back to normal. The temperature was warm again, the ticking noise was gone, and the figure had disappeared. That was the most terrifying moment of my life, and I hope I never experience anything like it again. The Silver Creature from Silver Bullet 54. I've seen some weird things my entire life. Even still, I'll always take sketchy stories with a grain of salt. One of the strangest stories I'd ever heard was from a friend in Florida who told me about a silver creature that he had seen before. He said it wasn't an animal, person, or a decoration, but something else, which was a weird way to describe it, because what's left after that? He challenged me to do a stakeout with him to see what it was, and I agreed. While I was down there, we actually talked to a local cashier at a store who corroborated my friend's claim, saying he had seen the same silver creature. He even showed me a drawing of it. The thing was flat, thin, long, and just plain weird. I commented that it looked more like the gelatinous slime from Dungeons & Dragons, but my friends insisted that this was real. During the first 5 nights, there was nothing to see there, except the occasional bird, person, or dog. But on the 6th night, that was when the show happened. At 11 p.m. on the 6th night, I was starting to get antsy. I told my friend to keep watching from his bedroom window, while I went out to stretch my legs a bit. As I was walking outside, my friend began to tap on the window. I ignored him, thinking he was trying to freak me out. But the tapping became so insistent and non-stop that I started to worry. I turned to the window. He was now pointing his finger to the left of me. I looked and saw something stranger than anything I'd ever witnessed. It was about a foot tall, thin, twitchy, and was silver in color. I spun to my friend's window and he nodded to confirm that that was what he had seen. I began to approach the thing, but as if in response to me being there and approaching it, it just flattened and began to slide, yes, slide, into the forest. I was so gobsmacked by this, I actually froze for a full minute. I stared at the trees and didn't move or speak. I was actually carried back inside by my friend. When he set me down, I began to ask him, or attempt to ask him, What? But my friend interrupted and simply said that was the thing he was telling me about. I had questions though. Like, where did it come from? What the hell is it? But obviously my friend did not have an answer for this. Luckily for us, whatever the thing was, it seemed to be uninterested and even afraid of people. But still, my human curiosity is begging me to find it again and to reach out and touch it. Gelatinous blobs, strange wolf-like creatures attacking prisons, and demons in your home. These sound like people you definitely want to get a drink with. A drink of blood, that is. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories, and I'm hoping you're liking this randomized approach to stories so that we can cover more topics. If you did enjoy the video, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you want to share your story and possibly have it narrated, go to darknessprevails.org or darkstories.org. You can support the show in other ways by using the links below. There's a link to my Patreon where you can donate, or check the link to my store where you can get some creepy cool merchandise. Now, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous episode, titled, A Skinwalker Climbed into My Sister's Room. 6 True Horror Stories. Delicious Lee says, grilled pineapple on pizza. I'm not anyone to judge. I have heard that that is pretty good on Canadian bacon pizza. But I don't know if you and I would get along, Lee. Old-fashioned Canadian folk says, I'm addicted to these videos. Keep it up. Nothing like a good horror story. You've got that right. I particularly love Canadian horror stories, because the Canadian wilderness gets awfully spooky. So Speaks Galactus says, who knew skinwalkers were so kinky? I did. I've always known. Oh yeah. Herpy Derpity says, dang, I've been seen without a bath towel again, huh? Wouldn't be a problem if you'd stop streaking into people's windows. I mean, I like it, but not everyone else is gonna like it. And Bull Moose says, I'm a big tough moose. Yes you are, Bull Moose. Yes you are. Well, that brings us to the end of this Darkness Prevails episode. But don't worry, more scary stories are on the way soon, so stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who continue to donate. They're pretty awesome people. Remember, stay safe out there, and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.